What happens when a man stands up to an HOA president who tries to hand out his cabin like it's hers? At Lake Brantley, one weekend turned into a showdown nobody expected. They say some weekends change you forever. For Isaiah Dunmore, that weekend began with a steering wheel in his hands and a stretch of winding roads through the Blue Ridge Mountains of northern Georgia. The trees pressed in like walls of green, the air sharp with pine, and the lake that mirrored the sky felt like freedom itself. He had been waiting all month to escape from coding deadlines and client calls. Out here, in the cabin his grandfather built with his own 2 hands back in the 1960s, Isaiah could finally breathe. The place carried memories. A rocking chair that creaked the same way it did when he was a boy, the smell of old cedar lining the walls, his grandfather's fishing pole still resting against the porch rail. It wasn't just a getaway. It was family history preserved in wood and stone. Every time Isaiah pulled into that gravel drive, he felt like he was keeping a promise to the man who taught him about patience, hard work, and how to respect the land. He parked his car, stepped out, and stretched his legs. The lake shimmered below, catching the last touches of afternoon light. He thought about grilling steaks later, maybe casting a line in the morning. The silence, broken only by the call of a hawk overhead, felt like it could carry away every ounce of stress he'd brought with him. Isaiah carried his bag inside, dropping it with a soft thud on the wooden floorboards. He ran his fingers along the window frame, glanced out at the rippling water, and whispered to himself, "Inhale." He poured a glass of water, sat on the porch, and let the stillness sink in. But peace has a way of slipping through your fingers when someone else decides it doesn't belong to you. The knock at the door wasn't hesitant. It was sharp, rhythmic, impatient. Isaiah frowned, setting his glass aside. He wasn't expecting anyone. He rose slowly, walked to the door, and pulled it open. A woman stood there, mid-50s maybe, with neatly styled hair and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority. She wore a confident smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Dunmore?" she asked, as if she already knew the answer. "Yes," Isaiah said cautiously. "I'm Constance Fairchild, president of the Homeowners Association here at Lake Brantley." She extended her hand as though it were an order, not an invitation. Isaiah shook it politely, though her grip was firm to the point of pressure. "Well," she continued briskly, "I see you made it up for the weekend." "That's good. Saves me the trouble of arranging access." Isaiah tilted his head. "Access to what?" "To the cabin, of course." Her tone was casual, like she was reminding him of something obvious. "I have guests arriving shortly. They'll be staying here tonight. I just need you to unlock it for them." For a second, Isaiah thought he misheard. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "You mean my cabin?" "Yes, this one," she replied, tapping her clipboard. "It's part of the community, Mr. Dunmore. We try to make things welcoming here. Everyone contributes." Isaiah's brows drew together. "This cabin isn't community property. My family owns it outright. It was never part of the HOA." Her smile thinned. "That's not how things work around here." Isaiah leaned on the doorframe, keeping his voice steady. "With all due respect, Miss Fairchild, this is private property. No one else is staying here." The confident smile vanished. Constance's lips tightened as if the air had soured. For a moment, she simply looked at him, eyes narrowing with the kind of stare that warned this conversation wasn't over. "Well," she said finally, her voice cooler now, "we'll talk about this again in a few minutes. I don't think you quite understand how we do things." She turned briskly on her heel, her shoes crunching the gravel as she walked back down the path. Isaiah closed the door, heart beating faster than before. He hadn't expected confrontation. Not here, not now. But something told him this wasn't the last knock he'd hear tonight. He didn't yet know that the simple refusal he gave would ignite a storm. The whole neighborhood would soon be watching. Isaiah didn't have long to wonder if Constance Fairchild meant what she said. Within half an hour, the crunch of shoes on gravel came again. This time there was no knock, just the sound of someone clearing their throat loudly outside his porch. Isaiah stepped out, trying to keep his posture relaxed, though the tension in the air was already heavier than before. Constance stood at the foot of the steps, clipboard clutched against her chest, posture rigid. She looked less like a neighbor and more like someone ready to preside over a hearing. 2 men he didn't recognize loitered a few feet behind her, pretending to admire the lake but clearly positioned as backup. "Mr. Dunmore," she began, her tone already sharper than before, "I think we need to clarify a few things before this becomes unnecessarily complicated." Isaiah crossed his arms. Go ahead. This property, she said, tapping the corner of her clipboard as if it were the law itself, falls within the boundary lines of the Lake Brantley Homeowners Association. That means all residences, whether occupied full-time or not, are part of our community agreements. Isaiah kept his voice level. My grandfather built this cabin long before the HOA even existed. I've reviewed the deed, it's separate. Always has been. Her eyebrows arched, as though his words amused her. That may be how you see it, but here we respect community standards. We share amenities. We work together. That's how we keep this place beautiful, safe, and welcoming. You don't want to be the one standing apart, do you? Isaiah didn't flinch. I came here for peace and quiet, not to hand over the keys to strangers. The two men behind her shifted slightly, glancing at each other. They hadn't spoken yet, but their presence made it clear she hadn't come alone to talk. Constance's smile returned, this time sharper, tinged with something performative. I understand you're new to spending more time here. Perhaps you don't realize how much we rely on cooperation. This weekend is special. Friends of mine, long-standing supporters of our community, made the trip from Florida. They're expecting accommodations. Isaiah's voice carried a note of finality. Then perhaps you should have booked them a room at the inn in Dahlonega, because they're not staying here. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, quick but unmistakable. She took a step closer to the porch, lowering her voice as if trying to press authority through volume control. You really want to start your time here by refusing a simple request? She asked. Everyone talks. Word spreads fast. You don't want people to think you're difficult. Isaiah leaned forward slightly, his words deliberate. Respect goes both ways. And right now you're standing on my porch asking me to give away my home for the weekend. That isn't a request, that's entitlement. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft slap of water against the shore. Constance's jaw tightened. The two men shifted again, this time a little closer, as though waiting for her signal. Isaiah held her gaze, refusing to let his own voice rise. He remembered his grandfather telling him years ago, never let someone mistake calm for weakness. Calm is control. He wasn't about to lose that now. Constance finally turned slightly, gesturing to the men behind her. You see what I mean? He doesn't understand how we work here. We'll need to make sure the board is informed of this resistance. One of the men muttered, Board will hear about it by Monday. Isaiah exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep his composure. Then let them hear. I'll gladly show them the deed. Constance's lips pursed as if she wanted to say more, but instead she tapped her clipboard against her palm, then turned as briskly as before. We'll see how long you feel that way once the community weighs in, she called over her shoulder. Isaiah stayed on the porch until the trio disappeared back down the gravel road. His stomach churned, not from fear, but from the unmistakable weight of confrontation. He had come here expecting quiet. Now he was dealing with a woman who seemed less interested in rules and more interested in control. He sat back down. Isaiah barely had time to settle his nerves before the sound of approaching voices carried up from the road. He stood scanning the path, and there she was again, Constance Fairchild. This time without her clipboard, but with a kind of fire in her stride that told him she had no plans of backing down. Trailing behind her were two women and a man, dressed casually in travel clothes, pulling small rolling suitcases through the gravel. They looked around with open curiosity, clearly expecting something very different than the standoff that awaited them. Constance raised her hand in greeting, her voice pitched loud enough for the newcomers to hear. There he is! Mr. Dunmore, the owner of the cabin, will be staying in tonight. Isaiah's stomach turned. She wasn't just bending the truth now. She was rewriting it. He stepped forward, meeting them halfway down the path. Hold on, Isaiah said firmly. This cabin isn't available. It's my family's private property. There must be some confusion. Constance cut him off with a sharp laugh. Confusion? No, Isaiah. These are my guests, Harold and Denise Kirkland and their daughter Sophie. They've driven nearly 8 hours for this weekend. Do you really want to send them packing? The man Harold looked between them, his brows furrowing. Wait, Constance. I thought you said this was arranged. You told us it was part of the community rentals. Constance put on a sympathetic smile. And it is. He's just new, doesn't quite grasp how things are handled here yet. Isaiah's jaw clenched. No, what I do grasp is ownership. My name is on the deed. My grandfather built this place. No board, no president, no community rules give you the right to hand over my keys. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Sophie tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom, maybe we should just get a hotel. Denise shook her head, whispering something under her breath to her husband. Harold, clearly embarrassed, looked at Isaiah and said quietly, We're sorry. We didn't mean to intrude. Constance's eyes flashed at the apology, as though it undermined her authority. She stepped closer to Isaiah, lowering her voice but making sure it carried enough for the others to hear. You're making a scene, Mr. Dunmore. This isn't how we treat neighbors. Hospitality matters. Do you really want to set this tone with everyone watching? Isaiah crossed his arms, steadying himself. I'm not the one making a scene. You brought people here under false pretenses. That's on you. Her voice sharpened. False pretenses? I've served as president for 7 years. I know how to manage this community. You're a newcomer who doesn't understand tradition. Around here we share, that's how we keep harmony. Isaiah took a slow breath. Harmony isn't when one person decides the rules and everyone else bows to it. Harmony is respecting boundaries, and my boundary is clear. This cabin isn't yours to give away. The Kirklands stood awkwardly nearby, whispering among themselves. Finally, Harold spoke again. Constance, maybe we should just find somewhere else. We don't want to cause trouble. Constance whirled on him, her voice rising for the first time. No, you were promised this cabin. You came all this way. Don't let him make you feel unwelcome. Isaiah stepped back toward his porch, not out of retreat, but to put physical space between them. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. This conversation is over. You are not staying here. I suggest you take your guests to a hotel before it gets dark. For a beat, silence hung heavy. Then Constance snapped, her voice cutting like glass. You'll regret this. Nobody defies me and makes it easy for themselves. Isaiah locked eyes with her. You don't scare me. That was the moment a neighbor from across the lake road walked up, phone in hand, clearly recording. The lens caught Constance mid-glare, Isaiah standing firm on his porch, and the Kirklands shifting uncomfortably with their luggage. Isaiah didn't want an audience, but part of him knew it was too late for privacy. By the next morning, Isaiah realized that Constance Fairchild didn't waste time when it came to influence. He woke to the sound of voices outside, low at first, then clearer as more people gathered near the gravel road that cut in front of his cabin. Pulling on a jacket, he stepped out onto the porch only to find half a dozen neighbors standing in small clusters, whispering and occasionally glancing his way. Phones were out, some aimed discreetly, others openly recording. What had started as a private disagreement was already becoming neighborhood theater. Constance was at the center of it all, clipboard back in hand. She gestured animatedly as she spoke to 2 older men and a younger couple. Her words floated across the road, unmistakable. He refused hospitality, she said, her tone dripping with authority. My guest had nowhere to sleep because of him. That's not how we maintain community spirit at Lake Brantley. We have standards. The younger woman furrowed her brows. But isn't that his property? I thought that cabin wasn't part of the HOA? Constance didn't miss a beat. That's what he claims, but records can be complicated. And either way, he's shown a lack of respect for our way of life here. Isaiah clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew if he stormed down there shouting, it would only fuel her narrative. But the whispers, the eyes, the quiet judgment, it all pressed on him. Finally, a voice rose from among the crowd. Isaiah, why don't you come explain yourself? It was Gerald Hinton, a neighbor he vaguely remembered meeting once years ago when he came for a fishing trip. Gerald's tone wasn't hostile, but it carried the kind of curiosity that begged for confrontation. Isaiah walked down the steps, stopping at the edge of the gravel. There's nothing complicated here, he said evenly. This cabin is my family's private property. It has never been part of the HOA. My grandfather built it, and the deed is clear. A murmur rippled through the small group. Constance crossed her arms. You see how defensive he is? Instead of working with us, he hides behind technicalities. Isaiah took a slow breath, letting his gaze sweep across the faces around him. What she calls technicalities are rights. Rights matter. Imagine if someone showed up at your home demanding the keys so strangers could stay the night. Would you hand them over? The younger couple exchanged glances, looking suddenly less sure. One of the older men muttered, Well, when you put it that way. Constance's voice cut through again. Don't be swayed by his words. I've been president for 7 years. I know how to keep harmony here. He wants to stand apart, to act like rules don't apply to him. That isn't the kind of neighbor we need. Isaiah's patience thinned. The rules don't apply because this property isn't under your authority. You can't invent control where none exists. The air was tense, almost electric. A neighbor standing a little apart, a woman named Patricia Lowell, lifted her phone slightly higher, recording every word. The community deserves to see both sides, she said simply. Constance shot her a glare. Patricia, put that away. This is an internal matter. Patricia shook her head. Not anymore. You made it public the second you dragged him into this in front of all of us. The small crowd shifted, some siding with Patricia, others glancing at Constance as if waiting for direction. It was clear the situation was slipping out of Constance's control, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. Isaiah saw his chance. Look, I didn't come here to fight with anyone. I came for peace. But what happened yesterday wasn't about community, it was about one person overstepping. I won't allow anyone to decide what happens in my home except me. A few nods came from the group, not agreement exactly, but recognition of his right to speak for himself. Constance's face hardened. This isn't finished. You'll see how neighbors feel once the board meets. She turned abruptly, motioning for the others to follow her back toward the main road. Some trailed behind her, others lingered uncertainly, their phones still out. Isaiah stood in the gravel, watching them scatter. The lake shimmered behind him, the trees whispered with the wind, but the peace he had once found here felt fragile now. The more she pushed, the more Isaiah realized this wasn't just about his cabin, it was about whether one voice of authority could rule over everyone else. By Saturday evening, Isaiah thought maybe the storm had passed. The neighbors had thinned out, Constance had retreated, and the lake was finally quiet again. He grilled a simple dinner, steak, potatoes, a cold beer, and tried to remind himself why he'd come here in the first place. The cabin wasn't just walls and a roof, it was his family's anchor, a place of memory and restoration. He wasn't going to let one person steal that from him, but as the sun lowered over the ridge, the quiet fractured again. The crunch of gravel announced another visitor. This time, Constance didn't come alone. She walked with Gerald Hinton, the neighbor from earlier, and 2 other HOA board members Isaiah hadn't met before. They came like officials on business, faces tight, eyes sharp, as though they were marching toward a verdict. Constance didn't waste time. Mr. Dunmore, she called out, her voice carrying a theatrical edge, we need to speak with you. This is about community compliance. Isaiah set down his plate and stepped off the porch. Compliance with what? Gerald cleared his throat. Constance says there's a dispute about your property's status. We thought it best to address it formally. Isaiah folded his arms, holding their gaze one by one. The status is clear. This land is private. I've got the deed inside if you want to see it. Constance's lips curled into a smirk. Deeds can be interpreted. Community expectations are equally binding. Refusing hospitality is the kind of behavior that erodes trust. If every homeowner acted as you do, we'd lose the spirit that holds us together. Isaiah stepped closer, voice low but firm. Hospitality isn't hospitality if it's forced. It's theft. You lied to your guests, told them this cabin was available, and then tried to shame me when I refused. That's not community. That's manipulation. The tension in the air tightened like a rope. Gerald shifted uncomfortably, but the other 2 board members seemed to lean into Constance's side, nodding along. One of them, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. Mr. Dunmore, it would be wise to cooperate. Resistance creates division, and division invites consequences. Isaiah narrowed his eyes. Consequences for protecting my own home? Constance stepped forward, her voice sharp now, stripped of politeness. Don't play victim. You think you're above us because you're not here year-round, but you chose to buy into this lake, and that means playing by our rules. Isaiah let out a dry laugh. I didn't buy into anything. My grandfather was here before the HOA existed. You can't rewrite history to suit yourself. For a moment, her face flushed with something close to fury. She looked around, noticing a few neighbors gathering again at the edges of the road, phones discreetly lifted. The audience both fueled her pride and trapped her. Backing down now would mean losing face. Gerald tried to soften the moment. Maybe we should all calm down. Isaiah, maybe you could consider letting Constance's guests stay just one night. A gesture of goodwill that might settle this. Isaiah shook his head. That wouldn't be goodwill. That would be me giving in to a threat. And once you give in, it never stops. Constance snapped, her words like a slap. You're making enemies where you could be making friends. Isaiah met her glare, his voice steady. Real friends don't start by trying to steal your house keys. The small crowd murmured. Some smirked at the sharpness of his comeback. Others whispered uneasily, but no one missed the way Constance's jaw clenched. The man with the glasses scribbled something on a notepad. We'll be reporting this to the board formally. You can expect action soon. Isaiah held his ground. Report whatever you want. The law is on my side. If you don't believe me, I'll bring the paperwork to the sheriff's office myself. The group exchanged glances, clearly not expecting him to mention law enforcement. For the first time, Constance's authority wavered. She smoothed her hair, forcing a smile. Sunday morning arrived with a thin mist over the lake and a heaviness Isaiah couldn't shake. He brewed coffee, hoping the calm of the water would settle him, but a caravan of headlights broke through the fog. On the road, cars slowed, then stopped near his driveway. Doors opened, laughter, rolling suitcases, and the kind of cheerful chatter that didn't fit the tension of the weekend spilled into the air. Isaiah set his cup down. He knew before he even stepped outside who was behind this. Constance Fairchild was already waving her arms like a hostess at a grand opening. A group of 6 people, 2 couples and 2 teenage boys, followed her lead. They looked sun-hatted and travel-worn, dressed for lake leisure, not for conflict. There it is, Constance announced brightly, gesturing toward Isaiah's porch as if it were a rental cabin she personally managed. The Dunmore place, all set for your weekend. Isaiah walked down the steps, meeting them at the drive, his voice caring enough to cut through their laughter. Hold on, nobody's staying here. The laughter faltered. Suitcases rolled to a stop. One of the men squinted at him. Excuse me? Constance said this was reserved for us. Isaiah glanced at her, his tone sharpening. Constance, how many times do I need to say it? This is my private cabin. It isn't part of your rentals. Stop telling people otherwise. A tall woman with a floral hat looked between them, her smile collapsing. Wait, so this isn't available? We just drove from Tampa for this. Constance's smile stiffened. Don't worry, it's just a misunderstanding. He'll unlock it for you. Isaiah stepped forward, planting himself firmly. No, I won't. Silence dropped like a stone. The 2 teenage boys shifted awkwardly. One of the men, red-faced now, set his suitcase down with a thump. Are you serious? We spent money, time, gas, because she told us this was handled. And now you're saying we can't even get in? Isaiah kept his voice calm. I'm saying you were misled. She never had the authority to promise you this place. You've been lied to. All eyes swung to Constance. Her cheeks flushed, but she straightened her back, fighting to keep her command. They're not lies. This community has always shared resources. One man's selfishness doesn't erase years of tradition, Isaiah shot back, louder now. Tradition doesn't override ownership. My grandfather didn't spend his life working, so you could hand out his cabin like party favors. The woman with the floral hat looked shaken. She turned to Constance. Why would you tell us it was guaranteed if it wasn't? Constance's composure cracked. Her words tumbled out fast. Because it should have been. Because this is how we operate. Nobody's ever fought me on this before. Maybe nobody else had the backbone, Isaiah muttered. The teenagers chuckled nervously, earning sharp looks from their parents. The guests clearly realized they'd been pulled into something larger than a weekend getaway. One of the men threw his hands up. Well, what are we supposed to do now? We've got no place to stay. Isaiah softened his tone. There's lodging in Delanaga. It's a 20-minute drive. You'll be more comfortable there than in a cabin you weren't welcome to in the first place. The suggestion only deepened the humiliation hanging over Constance. She turned on him, voice tight and bitter. You're making me look like a fool in front of my friends. Isaiah didn't hesitate. You did that to yourself when you promised them something that wasn't yours. A few neighbors, drawn again by the commotion, had gathered along the road. Phones were up, recording. The scene was no longer just between Isaiah and Constance. It was theater for the entire lake community. One neighbor whispered loudly enough for others to hear. She's gone too far this time. Another replied, Can't believe she dragged outsiders into it. Constance heard them. Her face hardened, and her voice cracked as she snapped. By late afternoon, the lake community felt restless. Conversations carried through the thin air, whispers spreading from porch to porch. Some neighbors avoided Isaiah's gaze, while others offered quick nods of sympathy, as if to say, "We see what's happening, but we don't want to be in the middle of it." By late afternoon, the lake community felt restless. Conversations carried through the thin air, whispers spreading from porch to porch. Some neighbors avoided Isaiah's gaze, while others offered quick nods of sympathy, as if to say, "We see what's happening, but we don't want to be in the middle of it." Isaiah tried to ground himself with a walk along the shoreline. He skipped stones across the water, the way his grandfather had taught him, counting the bounces, reminding himself why this place mattered. But the peace didn't hold. When he returned to the cabin, Constance was waiting. She wasn't alone this time. She had a small group with her, 3 board members and 2 neighbors Isaiah hadn't seen before. They stood in a semicircle in front of his porch, arms crossed like a jury waiting for the accused. Constance's voice rang out before he even reached the steps. "Isaiah Dunmore, you've left us no choice but to address your refusal formally. Your behavior has disrupted the harmony of Lake Brantley." Isaiah climbed the porch and leaned against the rail, looking down at them. "Disrupted harmony? No, I've defended my home. There's a difference." The man with wire-rimmed glasses, the same one who'd scribbled notes earlier, pulled a folder from under his arm. "We've reviewed community bylaws. Section 12 makes it clear that all properties within the association's perimeter fall under shared use guidelines." Isaiah's jaw tightened, and as I've said before, this property predates your association. "I've got documents that prove it was never signed into your covenant. You can't extend rules to land you don't control." Constance stepped forward, her voice laced with venom. "That kind of arrogance will not stand. You think you can waltz in here a few weekends a year, act like you're above us, and ignore the standards that keep this lake desirable. That's not how we operate." Isaiah kept his tone calm but firm. "What you call standards, I call overreach. You can't bully people into submission just because you wear the title of president." Her face flushed crimson. "Watch your words. I can make life here very difficult for you. Trash pickups delayed, property inspections tightened, fines issued. You'll find the board has many tools at its disposal." Isaiah's patience cracked. "Fines for what? For refusing to hand over my keys? You're threatening me because I wouldn't play along with your power trip?" The crowd of neighbors, who had inevitably gathered again, murmured at his words. Patricia Lowell, still recording on her phone, whispered, "She really just threatened him on camera." Constance snapped her head toward Patricia. "Turn that off." Patricia didn't budge. "Not a chance. People deserve to see how you treat us." The younger couple from the day before, who had been undecided, stepped closer to Isaiah. The woman spoke carefully. "Constance, maybe this isn't the hill to die on. If his deed says what he claims, then this property isn't yours to manage. Why force it?" Constance's eyes flickered, caught between fury and desperation. "Because if we let him get away with this, others will start resisting too. Then everything falls apart." Isaiah raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You hear that? This was never about me. It's about control. She's afraid of losing her grip." Gasps and whispers rippled through the group. Constance tried to regain her footing. "You're twisting my words. You're poisoning the community." Isaiah stepped down from the porch, standing eye to eye with her. "No, you did that when you lied to your guests, humiliated them, and dragged everyone else into your mess. I've been patient, but if this continues, I'll take it to the sheriff, and then it won't just be your reputation on the line." "It'll be legal." Her lips quivered, torn between shouting and swallowing her pride. She finally spat. "You don't belong here. People like you never do." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. It wasn't just about cabins or bylaws anymore. Everyone felt the edge in her tone, the line she had crossed. Gerald, uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should step back. This is getting too heated," but Constance wasn't finished. She jabbed a finger toward Isaiah. "This isn't over. By the next board meeting, you'll regret crossing me." The argument had barely ended before the neighborhood grapevine went into overdrive. By Sunday evening, Isaiah's phone buzzed with texts from 2 cousins who lived in Atlanta, asking if the crazy HOA fight they'd seen on Facebook was about him. Someone had posted one of Patricia Lowell's videos online, and it was spreading fast. Isaiah didn't want fame. He wanted quiet. But the spectacle had grown beyond his porch, and soon enough, law enforcement had no choice but to step in. Around dusk, a county sheriff's deputy pulled into the gravel road in a white SUV, lights flashing just enough to grab attention. The neighbors gathered instantly, as if the sound of authority had summoned them. Isaiah stood on his porch, arms crossed, while Constance appeared moments later, practically dragging 2 board members beside her like witnesses ready to testify. The deputy, a tall man with a calm demeanor, stepped out and adjusted his hat. "Evening, folks. I'm Deputy Colton Briggs with Union County Sheriff's Office. I've had multiple calls about a dispute here. Thought it best to come settle it before it escalates further." Constance was the first to speak, her voice pitched high, dripping with self-righteousness. "Deputy, thank you for coming. This man has been openly hostile to his neighbors and has refused to comply with our association's rules. He embarrassed guests I invited and has created division in our community." Isaiah bit back a laugh. "Deputy, with respect, that's not what happened. This cabin is my private property. It's never been under the HOA. She invited guests to stay here without my permission, then tried to intimidate me into handing over the keys." The deputy raised his hand. "One at a time. Miss Fairchild, do you have any documentation showing this cabin falls under HOA authority?" Constance pressed her clipboard to her chest. "The bylaws are clear. All residences within our perimeter are subject to shared use standards." Briggs held out his hand. "Let me see them." Reluctantly, she passed over the clipboard. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "These are your association's rules, yes, but do you have a deed, a covenant, or any signed agreement that specifically includes Mr. Dunmore's property?" Constance hesitated. "Well, no, but—" He cut her off gently but firmly. "Then these rules don't apply to him. An HOA can't enforce bylaws on property outside its covenant. That's not how the law works," the neighbors murmured. Patricia kept recording, angling her phone so both faces were in view. Constance's voice rose, strained. "You don't understand. This is how we've always operated. If you let him refuse, others will follow. We'll lose control of our community." Briggs closed the clipboard and handed it back. "Ma'am, with all due respect, communities don't run on control. They run on agreements. If his family never signed into the HOA, then he's not under your jurisdiction. End of story." Isaiah let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Thank you. I've got the deed inside if you want to see proof." Briggs nodded. "Might be good to have on hand in case this keeps up, but from what I see, you're in the right." Constance's face burned red. Her board members shuffled awkwardly, clearly unprepared for the deputy to side with Isaiah so quickly. She tried one last angle. "So you're just going to let him disrespect us? Ignore tradition?" Briggs's expression stayed even. "Ma'am, I'm here to enforce the law, not tradition." "If you or your board try to trespass again, you'll be the ones facing consequences." Gasps rippled through the group. A few neighbors even clapped softly before stopping themselves. Constance glared at Isaiah, her voice low but audible. "You'll regret this." "You don't—" For a few hours after Deputy Briggs left, the air around Lake Brantley felt lighter. Isaiah thought maybe the ordeal had reached its end. He sat on the porch again, coffee in hand, the quiet broken only by the lapping of water against the shore. But he knew better than to trust silence where Constance Fairchild was concerned. By Monday morning, her next move was already in motion. A printed letter appeared in every neighbor's mailbox, bold font stamped with the HOA's letterhead and signed by Constance herself. The language was dramatic. "Mr. Dunmore has shown blatant disregard for our community values. His refusal to cooperate endangers the spirit of Lake Brantley. The board will be discussing disciplinary measures." Isaiah found his copy crumpled in the bottom of his mailbox. He laughed bitterly. "Disciplinary measures? Against someone not even in the HOA?" He shook his head, but the smear campaign wasn't funny, and it was dangerous. That afternoon, Patricia Lowell knocked on his door, phone in hand. "Isaiah, you need to see this." She held up her screen. Videos of Constance's rants had gone viral. Clips of her shouting about tradition and threatening Isaiah had spread across Facebook and TikTok. People across the county were commenting, most siding with Isaiah, some mocking Constance, others furious that someone would abuse their HOA power so blatantly. "She's losing control of the narrative," Patricia said, "and she knows it." Sure enough, by evening, a crowd gathered near the lake again. This time, it wasn't just locals. It was people from neighboring communities who had seen the videos online and driven over out of curiosity. Cars lined the gravel road, and the once quiet neighborhood buzzed with the hum of strangers recording content for their feeds. Isaiah stepped outside cautiously. Constance emerged soon after, her face set in a mask of forced confidence. She climbed onto a small stone ledge near the water and raised her voice over the chatter. "Neighbors, friends, we are under attack," she shouted. "This man is twisting the truth, turning outsiders against us and dragging our community through the mud." The crowd responded with a mix of groans and laughter. Someone yelled, "You're the one who tried to steal his cabin." Phones lifted, capturing every second. Isaiah stepped forward, not planning to speak, but unwilling to let her frame the story unchallenged. His voice carried clearly. "All I've done is stand on my rights. She promised strangers access to my home without asking me. She lied to them, then tried to shame me when I refused. That isn't community, that's abuse." The crowd erupted, some clapping, some cheering. Constance's eyes widened, her control slipping further. Gerald Hinton tried to intervene, raising his hands. "Maybe we can calm things down," but Constance shoved past him, her voice cracking. "No, he's poisoning everything. He doesn't belong here!" Gasps rippled through the listeners. Her words carried venom she couldn't pull back. Patricia, recording steadily, whispered to someone nearby. "That's the end for her." Isaiah didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply said, "I belong here because my family built this cabin long before there was an HOA. My grandfather taught me respect for this land, and respect means standing firm when someone tries to take what isn't theirs." Applause broke out, stronger this time. Even some board members standing near Constance avoided her gaze, clearly unwilling to follow her any further. Constance looked around, realizing the tide had turned against her. The authority she once held with a clipboard and a sharp tongue had evaporated under the weight of her own arrogance. Her face paled as whispers spread. "She's finished." She went too far. She stumbled off the stone ledge, muttering angrily to herself, and stormed back up the road. No entourage followed this time. No one rushed to defend her. The crowd, sensing the drama was over, slowly dispersed. The morning after Constance's public collapse, the lake felt different. The usual quiet stillness was back, but it carried something new: relief. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now waved to Isaiah as they walked their dogs or loaded kayaks into the water. Some stopped by offering baked bread or a simple, "Glad you stood your ground." It was as if the entire community had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Isaiah brewed his coffee and sat on the porch, finally able to enjoy the view without the weight of confrontation pressing down on him. He thought about his grandfather, who had poured sweat into every nail and board of the cabin. That man had lived by a simple principle: respect isn't about power, it's about boundaries. Cross someone's without their consent, and you've already lost their respect. Isaiah realized he had just lived that lesson in the rawest way possible. Later that week, a formal announcement went out. The HOA board had voted to remove Constance Fairchild as president. The letter didn't go into detail, but everyone knew why. Too many witnesses, too many recordings, too much truth had been laid bare for her to spin it otherwise. Isaiah didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat when Patricia brought him the letter. He simply said, "I never wanted her job taken away. I just wanted her to leave me in peace." Patricia smiled faintly. "Sometimes peace only comes when people like her are stopped. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You reminded the rest of us that we don't have to let one person run everything." A few days later, Isaiah walked into the small general store in Blairsville. To his surprise, people recognized him. A man by the counter said, "You're the cabin guy, right? The one who stood up to the HOA lady?" Isaiah chuckled, embarrassed by the sudden attention. "Guess that's me." The man clapped him on the shoulder. "Good on you. A lot of us have been dealing with folks like her for years. Seeing you fight back, it meant something." On the drive back, Isaiah reflected on those words. He hadn't planned to become a symbol for anyone. He just wanted to protect what was his. But maybe that's how change always starts, with one person refusing to be pushed around, even when it would have been easier to give in. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the lake orange, Isaiah sat in the rocking chair that still creaked like it did in his grandfather's day. He let the sound settle him. He thought about the lesson carved into the weekend. Communities survive not because one person controls them, but because everyone respects one another. He knew the fight might not be the last. Someone else might try to test boundaries in the future, but he also knew that he wouldn't waver. He'd stand firm, the way his grandfather had taught him. the way he had just proven to himself. Isaiah spoke softly into the empty evening, as if speaking to the man who had built it all. I kept it safe just like you wanted. The cabin, the lake, the trees, and they all felt like they belonged to him again. Not because a deputy said so, not because a crowd cheered him on, but because he had refused to let intimidation strip away what mattered, and that was the moral of it all. Strength isn't about shouting the loudest or holding the biggest title. Strength is knowing when to say no, when to defend what's rightfully yours, and when to remind others that respect cannot be forced. Thanks for watching this video.